Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:01, so I think we'll get started. My name is Rebecca Colwill. I am the program manager for here at Acadia National Park, and it's a pleasure to welcome you today to the ongoing series of science symposiums that we've been featuring. It's really exciting to see everyone, even in remotely, as we move ahead with thinking about what's going on at Acadia. Today's session is an interesting one. You know, we think a lot about science for parks and parks for science, and this science symposium is kind of the quintessential event that highlights and features what science is going on, how we use science for management at the park, and how you know, science is part of the kind of the mission of both the park and our important partner here at the Cudic Institute at Acadia National Park. Today, we're going to kind of talk about another important part of the science at Acadia, and that is our visitors. We always take for granted that science is part of the management of parks and to protect resources. We have that thing called the Organic Act, which says that parks are places that are in perpetuity to protection of resources. But then the other half of that is also for the visitor experience. So today we've got two experts who are going to talk to us about the visitor side of the science at Acadia, as well as the implementation of that science. But before I do that, I also want to acknowledge that we are here on the unceded territory of the Wabanaki Nations, and that recognizing and acknowledging that the past is present and needs to be identified as such is part of what we do as well. So I welcome you here to Acadia National Park, and as I said, here in Wabanaki territory. Our first speaker is going to be Adam Gibson, and it's a pleasure to introduce Adam. He's the Parks social scientist. He's one of a small breed of folks in the Park Service, and we're really pleased to say that social science is front and center to some of the work we do here. Adam's going to talk to us about what we know about our visitors, who's coming to Acadia. But before I do that, I just want to do one quick housekeeping thing. As I said, we welcome you. We're glad you're here. Please keep yourself on mute. You're more than welcome to turn on your camera and be part of the community here. And please, if you're interested in putting in comments or questions into the chat, Catherine Schmidt at the Cudic Institute will be monitoring that, and there'll be plenty of opportunity after Adam speaks and then Laura speaks to have some conversation around the work that is going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, and thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate your time. I am Adam Gibson, the social scientist here at Acadia National Park. And so first, just to get this out of the way, as Rebecca mentioned, there are not too many of us in the National Park Service, only a few of us that are actually embedded in parks throughout the country. So what does a social scientist actually do? So as you may know, national parks have this difficult dual mandate that we're always trying to navigate, and that's to protect natural and cultural resources, but also to allow people to come and enjoy them and experience them. And so social scientists, you know, really live right at the meeting between those two objectives. And so we study the who, the what, the where, the when, the why of people. And we're constantly trying to answer this question, you know, how do we make sure that future visitors to the park will be able to experience similar natural and cultural conditions as current visitors? And again, we do that by studying everything about visitors. We try to understand what they're doing in the park, where they're going, how many of them are here. And so we collect a lot of descriptive data. We also collect a lot of evaluative data. So we ask visitors questions about their experience and the quality of their experiences. And that could be both, you know, real and hypothetical. And we conduct experiments as well. For example, we might test different messages and look for behavior change throughout the park if we're trying to get at some sort of behavior change. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing out there throughout the park. There's just a couple of major threats that I'll talk about, in my short time here to present to you. And two of the major ones that are facing our park. One is over-tourism. I think that one is pretty obvious. I'm sure that you're all aware of this. There's been a number of different articles, in the media this past year about that. And here's just a few examples of it. And, it's an interesting story here at Acadia. If you look at our visitation trends since we started, our most recent method of calculating visitation was in 1990. We've used that method, since 1990. We've got this upward trend, but it really doesn't tell the whole story. So if you sort of look at the last 10 years and all the time before the last 10 years, you get varying trends. So looking from 1990 through 2011, it's actually a bit of a downward trend, or at least not increasing. But if you look at the last 10 years, so 2012 through to 2021, you see this upward trend. And so really what we're dealing with is a pretty big surge just even in the last 10 years. And as you can imagine, the last 2 years have been particularly interesting because of the pandemic. So in 2020, we had a lot of travel restrictions throughout the state of Maine, and that severely affected our visitation here to the park. But it really didn't last very long. In the month of June, our visitation increase was like nothing we had ever seen. So we had this huge surge of increase. And then by the time September, October rolled around, we were setting visitation records. And essentially since October of 2020, every single month has been a record month. And so in the year 2021, last year, we had a record level of visitation of over 4 million visits. And that would put us, on par with parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite before the pandemic. So that is a huge increase. That's 23% higher than the 5-year pre-pandemic average. And another troubling trend there is that not only did we have more people, but we had a higher percentage of people in cars. So the Island Explorer bus system, which is our fare-free shuttle system throughout the park, was not running at capacity. There were fewer charter buses as well. And so essentially we had, if those buses had been running at similar capacities, we would have had about 90,000 fewer cars throughout the park. And that's an average of about 600 cars entering the park every day. So that's a significant issue that we're dealing with in 2021. In addition to over-tourism, another major threat facing the park is climate change. There's a number of different resource impacts that climate change causes, and those can also be related to visitation. So if we look at the average monthly visitation to the park, we've got these two areas on the sides that we call the shoulders, the shoulder season. So these are the spring and then fall times where visitation is sort of ramping up and then leveling off or decreasing. Again, if we look at these times since 1990, we again see a similar trend that we do in overall visitation, relatively flat from the period of 1990 to 2011, but then a large increase from 2012 to 2021. And if you combine this with these resource impacts that we were seeing, so we've got issues of sea level rise. We've got some pretty dramatic rainfall that's washing out carriage roads. This is a picture of the Maple Springs Trail, which is, I'm sorry, you probably couldn't see my cursor. This is a picture of the Maple Springs Trail, which is essentially now gone. If you combine this, essentially what we're seeing are fewer resources that are condensing people to an even greater degree into certain areas. So we've had carriage roads that were closed last year. And so people were redirected to other areas. And so it's condensing use even further. So what is the deal? Why is visitation so high? And what do people do here anyway? Well, as you can imagine, I think the reason why you're on the call is that you understand, the beauty of this place and what people like to do here. This is just a few of the thousands of pictures, that I've taken of my family, when we've been experiencing the park. There was a previous study asking people what they do in the park, and about 46% of visitors indicated their primary activity was to hike in the park. About 26% indicated their primary activity was just to view the scenery. And then 20% had no primary activity at all. So essentially people come here to do something or to do nothing. And a lot of people want to do that. And so what can we do about over-tourism? Well, Facebook has the answers. So we just need to look to Facebook, right? Here's some of the things that you can find where people have shared their solutions to our over-tourism issue on Facebook. They indicate, we should just have more buses. We should have more or larger parking lots. We should have a whole park reservation system, or similarly, we should just close the gates once we reach capacity. We should have higher fees so that we can hire more staff, or we should just have a carless park, just not allow any cars in the park at all. As you can imagine, some of these are essentially non-starters, and then others are not a solution to the whole problem. They could be a partial solution, but none of them is going to singularly address the issue. And probably the suggestion we get most often is this first one: more buses, just expanding the Island Explorer system and the commercial bus system, and that should solve our issue. And while that can help, it is, again, it's not that single solution. It's not going to address the problem. And you can start to understand that when you look at our visitation by travel mode. So looking at 2019, which was the year that we probably did the best in terms of getting visitors to take the Island Explorer or some other commercial bus. And when you look at our visitation distribution there, you see that about 90% of our visitation was from people in cars. And then about 10% was evenly split between the Island Explorer and commercial buses. And in order to get this level of people on the Island Explorer, it took about 120 drivers throughout the course of the season, and somewhere around 60 to 65 buses operating full-time through the whole season. So clearly that's not going to be a possible solution when you understand the difficulty it took to hire 120 drivers and house 120 drivers and operate that number of buses throughout the park in order to make up, the other 95% of our visitation. It's not going to happen. We'll never have a system where it's only buses in the park. So we'll always have to deal with some level of cars. And then add to this that in 2021, that issue became even worse because Island Explorer wasn't running at capacity. So we had about 98% of visitation that was in personal vehicles, and only about 2 to 3%. These are some rounding issues there, from people that were taking buses. So what we've got is the transportation plan. And as you can notice from this list that I'm going to show you in just a second, there are some elements where I was, jokingly saying, let's just look to Facebook. There are some of those solutions that are in this transportation plan. Again, we do want to expand bus capacity using the Island Explorer and commercial buses. We want to provide additional parking opportunities and try to promote this idea of a carless park. So having people park outside the park and take a bus in. And then additional parking lots. Trying to phase out larger buses so that we have vehicles that are more suitable to our roads that we have in the park. And then expanding the reservation system. And just as an example, there are two areas where we could expand this to, which is Jordan Pond or the Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. Again, there are no plans to do this in the very near future, but these are being considered, and we're looking at the possibility of doing that. So just going back to this list, probably the most prominent thing on this list is the reservation system, because that's what that's the most visible thing that we're doing right now. So we ran the vehicle reservation system for a full year in 2021, the full season, and we learned a lot from it. And I have just a list here of some positive outcomes from that and some areas of improvement. We did sell a lot of reservations, and we found that it worked very well, and that the lot was at capacity for a good portion of the time there. The road was a lot less congested. People felt like being able to purchase reservations online was convenient for a lot of people. And then 42% of reservations were made in the same day. So it still allowed for some level of spontaneity when visiting the park. And then you might have seen this chart in some other areas. And this shows, goes to the effectiveness of the reservation system. So this red line is a predicted estimate for what visitation would have been like to Cadillac using vehicle counts from the Sand Beach entrance. Historically, there's a really good relationship between the number of vehicles that are coming in that Sand Beach entrance and the number of vehicles that go to Cadillac. And in 2021, if we ran this estimate, this is what that visitation demand would have looked like. And this dotted line is the capacity that we had set for the Cadillac parking lots there. And as you can see, that red line bumps around most often, way above that capacity. And so in 2021, we did an excellent job of trying to manage this lot and avoid this sort of catastrophe we would have had we not had a reservation system there. But it wasn't perfect. There are some areas of improvement that we'll need to address, such as adjusting quotas to maximize use, increasing the use of some of those less desirable reservations, messaging about the purpose and the function of the system so that people better understand that. And then probably most importantly, increase the accessibility of reservations, make sure that people that are unable to purchase online can get them in some other way. And then, better have that balance between planning and spontaneity. We allow a certain of reservations, a long ways out, and then also allow those same day reservations, and trying to do better about that and make sure that balance is met. So finally, what I wanted to close on is just a discussion of what's next. There was a study that was done in 2020 that indicated 71% of respondents altered their travel plans as a function of the pandemic. So they went to different areas of the park. They went earlier in the day, explored fewer sites, spent more time in the car, and shortened visits to sites within the park. And so it has changed the way people visited Acadia. And it'll be interesting to see if these trends continue and how we might be able to change how we manage the park based on these different trends. And just my last point here, also in that study, there was one thing that was slightly alarming, was that 73% indicated they plan to wait for the end of the pandemic to visit national parks again. And again, this study was done in 2020. So in 2021, when we had record visitation, I hope that, I hope that we're not going to see, this other increase in 2022, but I'm not sure. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. All right, thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to pass it over to Laura Cohen. She's the Visitor Experience Education Program Manager, and she's going to talk to us about visitor services, programs, and digital media, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Great presentation. I learned something new every time. Hi, folks. I'm Laura Cohen. As Adam said, I lead the visitor experience and education, visitor experience and education division here at Acadia. I am going to keep my camera off during the presentation. I just wanted to pop on and say hello and show my face, but we're having some network challenges here. So we will get on with the show. Okay. All right. Can you see my screen? Yes, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. So Adam's presentation was really great in terms of providing us some of the context of the visitation that happens here at Acadia. And in my world, what we really think about is how we connect all of those visitors to this place, how we connect them to Acadia National Park, and connect them also to the science that's happening here. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So one of the first things that we do is that we start by realizing that visitors actually start experiencing Acadia National Park well before they ever step foot in Acadia National Park. And in fact, we really consider visitors people visitors that don't visit at all. If someone is visiting our website or interacting with our digital content or maybe attending a virtual program, we still consider that a visit in terms of what I do. So what do? We work collaboratively with partners, with other divisions in the park to create transformative visitor experiences that are rooted in the power of this place, driven by management objectives, and shared via powerful stories. And that happens across this spectrum from when a visitor has an idea or first becomes aware that they might want to visit a park to their pre-visit where they're doing some planning, maybe talking to us on the phone or checking out our website. The visit itself, when they're physically here or physically or digitally interacting with us. And then the post-visit, what happens after? Maybe they're sharing their experiences online, like Adam showing photos of his kids on his Instagram feed, and all of that sort of post-visit engagement that happens. And this is laid out here on this slide in a line, but in many ways, it really is a circle where people are sort of constantly moving through various aspects of this visitor experience life cycle. And so across that life cycle, we do various things to engage with them and hopefully help them connect better to this place. So we provide visitor services, that's information and orientation and wayfinding. We do programming, so that can be public programming that's formal, meaning you're actually attending a walk or a hike with a ranger. Maybe it's informal and we're bumping into each other on the trail and interacting with each other. We also do curriculum-based education programs, so working with K through 12 and even post-high school students. Those are day programs like a visit, or like the Cudic Education Adventure, which is our residential education program that we do in partnership with the Cudic Institute. And our goal across all of these different aspects of our program is that we're seamlessly blending the virtual space and the in-park experience, that nowadays for most visitors, you're sort of bouncing in and out, or sometimes in both worlds at once. Maybe you're looking at your phone, trying to find directions while you're in the park, or trying to book that reservation system that Adam spoke about. So for our public programming, we do a variety of talks and tours. We're out on boats in the wonderful ocean around Acadia National Park, and this really helps with congestion as well, and providing a very uncongested experience of Acadia from the water. We do bike tours, we do campfire programs, and then obviously a lot of your traditional hikes, botany walks, and bat talks, and all sorts of fun things like that. We try to focus a lot on engagement activities as well. So an engagement activity might be where we're crafting something together. Maybe we're writing a poem together, or drawing something, or doing something that allows us to actually physically engage and not just listen to someone talking. We have festivals and fairs over the course of the year, like the Cudic Winter Festival that we go to, and other fairs and festivals in town that really help us engage with the community. And then, of course, citizen science activities. So these are some of the activities that we do using various programs that help visitors be a part of the science that is happening here. And there really is no better way to learn or understand the science than to do it yourself. We also have a lot of informal engagement that happens, like I mentioned, where we'll be out roving on the trails. This is not only National Park Service employees, but also our partners over at FOA with their Summit Steward programs, where we are out and talking Leave No Trace or various other topics out in the park. For our education programs, we have a wide variety of day programs going from kindergarten all the way up to high school. A lot of focus around with the science around middle school as the science standards around earth science in particular are very targeted towards middle school. So we have our residential program, the Cudic Education Adventure, which is a 2 to 3 night overnight program where students come as a class and actually stay in the park and do some pretty in-depth science learning. We also go into the classroom. Now post pre-COVID, that was pretty much physically going into the classroom. Now that we are in a new COVID reality, a lot of that can be done virtually. So we do virtual engagement activities with students around the country and our education team have done some really great fun programs like a coast to coast tide pooling program where we spoke with students in Washington State about tide pooling here in Acadia and how that is different from tide pooling on the coast of Washington. We also engage with schools. We have an outdoor classroom program where we work with schools to develop their own outdoor learning. So not actually coming to Acadia National Park, but in their backyards, in their schoolyards, thinking about what outdoor learning that we could do. And then we do teacher professional development as well. This, as I mentioned this a little bit, so virtual programming really has met its moment with the pandemic. It existed long before the pandemic, but it has really kicked up a notch as schools are much more accessible and have the technology for doing digital programming. So sometimes we are in our own digital studio talking to classrooms. Other times we are out in the field and are able to show kids who may never see the ocean or never see coniferous trees what these amazing resources look like. Of course, we do a lot of website and digital content as well. This is yet another way to engage with people, not only on how to stay safe here when they come and visit, but on also some of the major issues that we are dealing with or studying. So like emerald ash borer, the invasive insect, the invasive shore crab, climate change, and all of the challenges that we face and all the science that's happening. So why do we do this? It may seem like a silly question to ask, but one of the reasons why we do what we do is that we know that through people making their own connections intellectually and emotionally to this place, that they hopefully create lifelong connections to it and want to participate in its preservation. And so really it all comes down to serving visitors as they come, helping to keep them safe, and also protecting park resources for future generations. And why do we do it the way that we do it? And in a lot of ways, science tells us why. National Park Service has been doing education programs and visitor engagement programs since the early 1900s. 1920s was the first documented National Park Service sort of ranger-led program. I think science has caught up to us and told us that storytelling is a really good way to learn. That by focusing on those emotional connections, those stories that exist in the places that we love, that you actually create a stronger and more lasting connection than by simply trying to focus on facts. And that's so something that we really focus on here with our engagement activities, is that we are really trying to make opportunities for visitors to make their own connections and to engage in their own ways. And one of the reasons why that's really important is because we do know over the course of time that the majority of visitors, particularly to Acadia National Park, were over 90% white. They tend to be affluent. They tend to be higher educated, having college degrees, master's degrees. And the more that we can find different and new ways to tell the stories of Acadia and to ensure that all people can see themselves in our resources here, the greater opportunities we have to connect with diverse audiences. And so that is something, again, from the storytelling side that we continue to work on. And so just a little bit more proof as to why we do what we do. This is one of my favorite science communication tales. Catherine, I'm not sure if you agree. I can't remember if you agree or not, but for those that don't know about the loneliest whale in the world, I think this is a really great example of the science of storytelling and the storytelling in science. And for a long time, some scientists were documenting the course, the travels of a whale who had not ever found a mate and had been basically they were approximating or hypothesizing that the whale song was at a higher basically pitch level than the other whales in its species. And so even though this whale was calling out and doing mating calls and singing as other whales were, that basically the other whales weren't hearing him or her. And so from a storytelling point of view, this whale caught on in a lot of different ways. So you can see here the Guardian and the Washington Post newspapers did multiple stories. They developed animation videos about this whale, dubbing him the loneliest whale in the world. For a while, he had the 52 Hertz whale had a a Twitter account where he was tweeting about his travels and how sad and lonely he was. And then if you can read, I'll play this video clip for just a second. You can read the subtitles here. This is not in English, but this is BTS, one of the most popular bands in the world right now, who actually wrote a song about this whale. So I won't keep playing that, but millions of people around the world have experienced, whether it's through song or social media or newspapers, this whale, and some of them, at least some of them, have trickled down into the science behind it. And I just think that that's a really great example of how, when we look for the stories that exist in science, we can connect with new generations, new audiences, and even existing audiences in a deeper way that may have some more connection. And another reason why this is really important is because of the conversations that are happening around science, which in many ways can feel a little bit distant and esoteric to people that are not scientists. And these are just a couple of books that are out right now talking about basically the disconnect between what we do in science and science communicators and the conversation that's happening around science around the world. And so one of the reasons why we do, again, what we do is that we as public servants have a public trust. And so we work really hard to maintain that level of trust with each other. And so we make sure that what we're doing is informed by science, but powered by story. And I think that is really the end. We hope that through what we do, that you swipe right on Acadia National Park and other parks and can create a long-lasting connection that you will carry forward. And that is all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Adam. Hi, everybody. This is Catherine Schmidt. We've had a couple of questions in the chat. I have a bunch of questions that were submitted with registration, and you can also continue to use the chat. You can raise your hand if you'd like to unmute and ask a question directly. And I'm actually, Tim Watkins, if you're willing to unmute and ask your question. You've asked 2 questions and maybe the first one, if you want to start us off.
Sure, thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. And I guess my first question was really for Adam, and it had to do with the buses and whether bus use is promoted with certain pro-social behaviors. And if those pro-social behaviors are more focused on the visitors' convenience and stress levels, like don't worry about driving and parking, or if it might be a little bit more aspirational, having to do with conservation and reducing carbon footprints.
Yeah, that's a good question. The problem isn't really getting people to ride the bus. People in Acadia ride the bus. When the Island Explorer is running at capacity, there are very few buses that are not at capacity, that are not full. So it's not really a question of trying to convince people to ride the bus. It's more trying to increase the ability of that system to carry more people. So to have more buses, to run more buses, to do more routes, etc.
Thanks, Adam. There was a question that came in with registration that I think other people may have as well. And I just wonder, Adam, if you could say something about the impact of all of this visitation. So you gave us some good numbers, but what, or so the question is, what are the 3 most significant visitation impacts or opportunities that that are resulting from this record visitation? And another way to ask that question would be sort of, what are people complaining about?
Yeah, well, I mean, number 1 would be parking. So what I say often is that, our level of visitation at Acadia is high, but we don't necessarily have a people problem. We have a vehicle problem. Acadia has a good capacity to handle a lot of people, but we can't handle a lot of cars. And so that's the essence of the transportation plan and why we're trying to address it. And, let me just tell this story very quickly. This past year in 2021, I had some family visiting in July, and I took my brother-in-law on a tour of the carriage roads. We rode, for about 15 miles on the carriage roads, and we saw one single person that entire time. We saw one hiker on the carriage roads for that entire time. And the reason was we left the parking lot at around 5:30 or 6 in the evening. And so people go to certain sites, and people go to those certain sites at certain times. And when you avoid those sites maybe, or avoid those sites at certain times, then you can experience a different park. So it is possible. So again, it's not just the level of visitation, it's how people visit the park, the way that they're visiting the park in cars, and that they all want to go do the same things at the same times. Other impacts, that we see, probably one of the most common pieces of litter we see now are discarded masks. So in the pandemic, we just created a whole new source of litter, which is horrible. So I think just in addition to vehicles, it would be just people and litter, and people trampling vegetation. And then probably the other large source of visitor impacts is dogs, unfortunately. So it would be waste from dogs or dogs off leash. So that would be my list if I had to make one.
Could you, Adam, can you clarify? There are some questions about cudic, and I think this might be an opportunity to just sort of clarify how the park sort of manages visitation at cudic. So the question is about opening up the cudic section has relieved visitor congestion on MDI, and I think, maybe we can just clarify that given Cudic Institute's location in the cudic section.
Yeah, so cudic was never intended to be a release valve for MDI, for Mount Desert Island. That's not the way that we manage it, and that's not the intended purpose of it. And it has seen a surge of visitation as well. So like I said, in 2021, we were about 23% above the 5-year average and the pre-pandemic average. And cudic was about 20%. So they saw a large increase, but not as much as MDI. So both are increasing, but MDI is increasing a little bit more than cudic.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question, I'm just going to keep you on for one more, and then I'm going to expand the conversation and bring Laura in. But there's a question about, do we know sort of how many people come with bicycles and any specific plans for managing bicycles or sort of providing sort of trail and access points without crowding the parking lots?
Yeah, I do have a number on bicycles it's going to take me a minute to find it, so I can put it in the chat when there's a question for Laura. But what was the second part of the question? Oh, how we manage that?
Yeah, and if there are plans, I guess, for, with bikes, you have to kind of go to a parking lot. You've got to drive to get onto the carriage trails. And so are there plans with the surrounding communities for better connectivity?
Yes, there are a few things that we're trying to do. So one of the major access points for the carriage road system is at Eagle Lake. And as I mentioned in that list of transportation plan sort of action items, one thing that's in the plan is to open up a new lot at the Eagle Lake area, which would provide access to the lake and to that carriage road in particular. The other thing that the Island Explorer has been doing, so you can put your bike on the Island Explorer as well and access it that way. They were also running a shuttle system called the Bike Express that ran from Bar Harbor and then dropped off at Eagle Lake. That stopped in 2020, in part because of the pandemic, and also it probably would have stopped anyway just because of where it was picking up in the middle of Bar Harbor. Just wasn't really working well for the town. And so we were trying to rework that, and I think that it will relaunch in 2022. So stay tuned on that. And so again, that would be a shuttle system that ran from Bar Harbor. Its sole purpose is to shuttle people and bikes, directly from Bar Harbor to Eagle Lake. And so those, I think, would be the two primary ways that we're addressing that.
Great. Yeah, John Kelly just posted in the chat that the Bike Express will operate in 2022. We have a question for Paul that Laura, perhaps you could answer. And that's about, are the visitation times available for people to plan their visits? Like, how do people find out when is it crowded at certain locations so that they can plan accordingly?
Sure. We do have kind of in our general language about visiting early in the morning, later in the evening, or later in the afternoon. We really don't like to prescribe specific times because it will, we don't want to drive visitation sort of that intentionally. And it can create other issues, kind of like squeezing the toothpaste tube. If you tell everybody to squeeze the toothpaste tube at one time, then all the toothpaste comes out at once. So we do make general recommendations for people, kind of late afternoon, early morning, but not specifically at a specific point in time. I don't know if that helps. I think part of this too is also one of the things that we really have made an effort doing over time is setting expectations for visitors. So everything from the pictures that we choose to use to how we talk about a certain site or location, we want people to know that they the iconic pictures that you see of the Acadia shoreline with no other cars parked and no traffic and no other people is probably not the experience that you're going to get when you come here especially during the season. And so we work hard to make sure that we're setting the expectations so visitors don't have kind of an Instagram perception of to what they're going to get here when they arrive.
Thank you. There's a question about activities or programming for young adults or teenagers. Can you say anything, Laura, about that particular age group and what opportunities are available?
Sure. About like what specific activities we offer targeted at that age group?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of our general public programming is going to really hit that age group. Beyond that, I think there's some kind of internship / volunteer type activities that people could partake in that might be for a little bit older. So some of those could be like the YCC program, which is a youth conservation corps program that employs young adult. I think 14 is the entry age for that in work activities here in the park. So that's really kind of the main thing that comes to mind is our general public programming, and then the kind of internship early career, transitional career things that we have. I will say, Sue, I think some of the citizen science activities can really appeal to some with the younger generation, in that there is a little bit more digital engagement that happens with those. So some of the recording that happens of the science happens on various apps and things like that. And so sometimes that can be a little bit more friendly for the older kids and not so much the younger kids, because those apps aren't necessarily targeted towards people under 12 or so.
I think, that age group is definitely, personally me, and I think us at Cudic would be interested in helping to curate, things that would appeal to that age group. It's such an important age to be experiencing sort of nature and parks. And so whoever asked that question, that came in with registration, thank you. And the next question I have to ask, this is not my question, I promise, which is, to what extent are visitors interested in learning about science and research in the park? And more broadly, how do you know what visitors want?
That is a great question. And we're always clamoring for more and more data about what visitors want. I really can't get enough of that kind of data. And I actually had a whole separate part of this presentation, I think, that I did last year that focused on some market research around the types of people that visit cultural institutions and parks and what that tells us about what people are looking for when they come to parks. And I think that is, to be honest, the best, the real quick and dirty answer is that we can look at some of our activities that we offer, and we do keep counts and have historically kept counts as to what programs or activities get what type of attendance, what's popular and what's not. And so we will move and shape our activities based on that. But that's a very sort of microcosm of what visitors want, because visitors that attend programs are already self-selecting. If you're the type of person that likes to attend a program, then you've already sort of self-selected you out in terms of what are the programs that what are the people that aren't attending programs wanting, and what are audiences that aren't coming wanting? And so for that, we really have to look at market data and market research, and we have to look at what's happening in similar places. And the short answer is people are interested in the science and kind of, what the behind the scenes, I guess you could say, of national parks, of really wanting to understand it, wanting to, talk with a ranger or have that kind of one-on-one interaction with, be it a ranger or a volunteer, or even a partner in the service, partner for the Park Service. They just want to understand a little bit more. And I'm looking at a graph here now. So it was like third on the list of this market research around people who visit parks and cultural institutions was interacting with staff, volunteers, and performers. So they do want to talk with us. Second on the list was seeing it or interacting with exhibits, so that people do want to read or learn. But number one, by more than double, was time with friends and family. And I think that is really the true and consistent message around thinking about how all types of people want when they come to national parks, which is that they want to make memories with the people that they love, or on their own, that solitude. They want to have that sort of memory that they can carry away with them. And so that's one of the reasons why we do focus a lot on these kind of what we call opportunities for engagement, and that if we can structure or provide these windows where people can create their own memories and create their own connections to the park, that we're really just facilitators of that experience. We're not sort of preachers to the choir, but that we are on the opposite. We are sort of standing back and helping where we can. So that's a little bit of the approach. I will say too, on the opposite side, what do visitors not want? And we have very clear and obvious guidance, that one of the things that really turns people off from visiting parks and cultural institutions are negative interactions with staff. And that you can really have the opposite effect on a person's future use of going to different parks by keeping your interactions positive. And this is one of the reasons, particularly around issues of equity and inclusion, why we really have to be doing our homework and be making sure that we are being inclusive in our hiring practices, so that we are setting up positive experiences and interactions, because those do have ripple effects into the future. And Adam, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add about in terms of like activities that people are doing here.
Well, I was gonna pivot to Adam, because I think that with the same question of how do we know what people want? Because you know what they're doing, right? You know what they're doing, but they're only doing what their options are. And so how do you sort of know if there's something they'd rather be doing if it was available?
We ask them. So we do a number of different surveys in the park, and we ask them. A lot of the surveys that are done in the park are actually done through universities and research partners in the park. And the problem with those studies, one of the major flaws, as you can imagine, is that we're only asking the people that are here. We're not asking the people that are not here. And that's a challenge that the Park Service as a whole faces, is to how to increase visitation from people that typically don't visit parks, and to better get at that idea of accessibility and equality. And so that'll continue to be a challenge. There's a number of ways that we're trying to address that, but it's hard. But essentially we ask people various questions about their experience and about their preferences and attitudes towards different things.
Thank you. There's a question about, do we know like how or when do people decide to visit? So like how far in advance are they planning their trip? a month in advance? How spontaneous are people? Are they planning their trip a month in advance, years in advance? Do we have that information?
Yeah, I don't know if Laura has anything to add, but I could start with this one. So, the reservation system gives us a pretty good insight about this question. So in 2021, we opened it up. I can't remember exactly when, but it was at least 90 days before the first reservation. And that's what we intend to do this year as well. And so what is interesting with that is to understand how many people buy reservations that far out, and then how many people use those reservations. What we can do is look at the likelihood of using a reservation as a function of how far out you make your reservation. And what we found was the farther out you make your reservation, the less likely you are to use it. So essentially, if you're making your reservation 90 days out, there's a probably 50-50 chance that you're not going to use it. And so that makes it interesting, again, for like how many reservations we sell and how we make that split between reservations we sell really far out and reservations we sell the same day. It's always, we want to make sure that we, again, provide that balance and that we provide those options for people to do both those things. Another interesting part to that question is that there is a very strong relationship between people accessing the website and the visitation for the following month. So you can use the number of people that access the Acadia National Park website and interact with it, and then use that number to predict how many people will visit the park the following month. So that would suggest that, it's about a month out that people are planning their trip. And it could be that they make reservations for a hotel or some other accommodation really far out, but then when they actually do the real trip planning, it's about 30 days out. So I didn't know if Laura wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you said exactly what I was going to say, that yeah, we can, in terms of predictability, we can see a little bit of bump on the website that really gives us an idea as to when things are starting to pick up. Another sort of interesting access or aspect to that as well is that the Park Service is in the middle of conducting a virtual visitor study. This is really the first of its kind, and we're really all of us in the field are really excited to see the outcomes of this study. And it's going to be looking at, the reach of our digital presences and how people are using them. And then they're evaluating their effectiveness as well. And I think the goal in that is to not only make better digital products, but also to be able to put a bit of a value on the digital visitor and the digital. We're able to really connect visits to national parks with real tourist dollars that really drive local economies around national parks. But the truth is that engagement really starts online. And so the more that we're able to drill down into how people are using our digital presences and how that translates to real life visits, the better that we can do what we do.
I'd like to, we're nearing the end of our time together. I want to thank everybody for joining. And I want to end on a note of optimism and action. And that is in the audience today, we have a lot of friends, park friends and family and supporters. And so Laura and Adam, I wonder if you could share, in a word or a phrase, how can we, so we're coming into a new season, I think everybody is anticipating the same levels as last year. How can we support the park, and how can we approach the upcoming season? What attitude and sort of philosophy would you like us all to have to support you going into this upcoming season?
Laura, you look like you're thinking, so I'll go ahead. I think my suggestion would just be slow down in a number of different ways, both literally and figuratively. I think just on the whole, I think people drive too fast in the park and they literally need to slow down, particularly when they're racing up Cadillac to catch the sunrise. Just slow down. I took a lot of comfort in that number that said that 20% of the people that come to the park basically have no primary purpose. And I think maybe I would suggest that, in that there are a million different amazing things and experiences you can have in the park. And if you slow down and maybe not be so goal oriented, frankly, I personally don't think that Cadillac is the best place to view a sunrise or a sunset, even though social media will lead us to believe that, or at least there are plenty of other places that are just as good. So sort of just slow down and appreciate all of the wonderful things about the park, not just those 5 things that you see on Facebook and Instagram.
Thank you. Laura?
I think that's a good one. Have a plan B, as we always say. So I think I would say to, we really view the visit to Acadia happens in partnership with you all. It really does. The visitors do not make a distinction between visiting Acadia National Park and visiting MDI or the Cudic Peninsula. It's all one. And so I think that's where, to my big, and I guess in my view, optimistic message is that we're one team in this, and that we are really all trying to work towards making this experience the best possible and the lowest impact possible for the long-term preservation of the park. And I think as long as we can continue to work towards that and have that patience and slowing down in the meantime, that we will get there and continue to try new things to get there.
Thank you. Rebecca, would you like to close us out?
I want to thank our speakers. That was excellent. I learned a huge amount, and I think we all did, about how we can think about how we're managing parks. And so thank you everyone for joining us. And again, well done, Laura and Adam and Catherine. See you all next time.
Thank you. Thanks for joining, everybody.